Hi, welcome to The Importance of Planning. This is the second in a three-part webinar series presented by Library Strategies, which is a consulting group at the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. So to tell you a little bit about us, this is Sue Hall. Sue's the Director of Library Strategies and a Principal Consultant, and also really the author of the Rapid Results process, and really a core service that we provide. Sue has over 20 years of consulting experience with libraries and library organizations of all kinds, including friends and foundations, as well as many, many different kinds of nonprofit organizations. As I said, Sue developed the Rapid Results process and has facilitated innumerable strategic and development planning processes across the country with all kinds of organizations, and is often on the speaking circuit as well, speaking about libraries and library organizations and planning and development topics.
And my friend Stu Wilson, with the great smile here, has been a principal consultant with us. He was our first principal consultant, in-house consultant, besides myself and Peter Pearson, who was the president of the Friends at the time. Stu has been working doing rapid results planning across the country. He's the former executive director of the Hennepin County Library in Minneapolis and the surrounding county. And before that, he was the former vice president of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library here. Other than his work in the library world, Stu has a long history of work with literacy organizations and other nonprofits. And he currently is the founding director of Fitzgerald in St. Paul, which is an organization that takes pride in the fact that F. Scott Fitzgerald was born and raised in St. Paul, and he's doing some wonderful things with that organization on the side.
I want to tell you a little bit about Library Strategies to begin with. We're a unique consulting group that's based in the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, which is really the foundation for our library. It was created in 2006 because libraries across the country were approaching us to really replicate our success as a foundation, both as a fundraising organization and advocacy, as well as a host of other things that St. Paul does particularly well and we're very proud of. Our consulting group has a host of services. We have many, many consultants, both internally and externally. As I said, we are a consulting group, the only consulting group within a library organization, which makes us very unique. And we only work with libraries, which means we have an expertise that very few consulting groups have.
Did you mention that we have worked with clients in 33 states and Eastern Europe, Moldova, and Romania?
And adding new states as we go.
As we speak. So, as Stu mentioned, we offer a variety of services. We do strategic planning, do a lot of work with fundraising organizations. We help libraries prepare for new buildings or renovations by doing feasibility studies and capital campaigns. Most recently, in the last year and a half, we've done an incredible amount of work with Friends and Foundations. We're seeing Friends and Foundations merge and collaborate and really do a lot more for their libraries than they've ever done before. We've done facilities planning, executive searches, staffing, board development. Essentially, the services that we offer just make sure that your library is prepared to continue to thrive and grow.
As I said at the beginning, this is a part of a three-part series on planning. We encourage you to look at the first webinar, which was on preparing to plan. This webinar will be focused on our Rapid Results strategic planning process, which we developed and we're very proud of and has proven to be very successful with tens of libraries across the country as well as internationally. And then our third webinar series will focus on development and fundraising planning. Sue's going to talk a little bit about Rapid Results planning and the genesis of that process.
Okay. Rapid results planning, we started it about 5 years ago, and we were working with a library in White Plains, New York. It had a new library director who really wanted to get to know the community and what the community wanted from the library. So he asked us if we could develop a process where it could really be a community-driven process rather than a process driven by the board and the staff, doing a survey and focus groups, and then taking the data and going away and creating the plan. And so we, in Library Strategies, sat around and talked about how could we improve on the processes that were out there. Rapid results planning is built on some of the same foundational concepts, We look at data. We do community surveys. But basically, the rapid results planning process is much more stakeholder driven. We get the community in the room with the library board and the library staff, and they actually create the framework for the strategic plan. And since creating it about 5 years ago, as Stu said, we've done it with over 36 libraries, all of whom love the process and find it very energetic and very synergistic. We've really just had great results with rapid results planning.
So for this webinar, we're going to focus on the Rapid Results Planning Retreat and then also implementation planning. I think it would benefit you to also look at the first webinar and preparing to plan, because there are some aspects of getting ready for the strategic planning process that we cover in that webinar that we're not going to cover in this process. For this one, we really are going to focus on the core of what we believe is a good planning process, which is the planning retreat, and then also talk about the tactical implementation plan, which is really staff-focused, where the retreat is more community-focused.
So the first thing that takes place in the rapid results planning process is creating a planning team, and we talk about that in the first webinar. And the purpose of this planning team is to identify the stakeholders that you want to get input from in your plan, nailing down logistics of a rapid results planning retreat. This is something that you are inviting stakeholders, individuals from groups across your community, and inviting a really broad number of stakeholders to help you come in and plan for the library. These retreats oftentimes have anywhere from 60 to 80 people in the room working with you. So one of the first things that you want to do is nail down the logistics. Where are you going to have this retreat? How long is it going to last? How are we going to get people to come to it? How are we going to invite them? How are we going to ensure that we get them there? And then following up to make sure that you get the people in the room that you want to. I have to say that having done probably 20 of these processes, the first thing that people say to us is, you know, you're never going to get 40 or 50 people in the room to spend a whole day of their lives or a whole Saturday. And we have yet to come up with a single circumstance where we didn't fully get the number of people that we wanted in the room. I think the only time that didn't happen was with Stu, and it had something to do with an ice storm.
Ice storm was
in
pretty
Tennessee
ugly
or something.
in Nashville. So
but you still had pretty good number of people
We did still
there.
had a lot of people show up.
But this is a process that people get really excited about and really enjoy. So the first piece of it is just making sure that the planning team and everybody who's going to work on this process really knows what it looks like and begins to nail down the basic steps that need to occur before you actually jump into planning right off the bat.
And just to follow up on one point, stakeholders is a big word that makes it sound like you're just going after community leaders to be involved in your process. And by stakeholders, we really mean people in your community that have some stake in the future of your library. And that can include teenagers, it can include homeschooling moms, as well as your community leaders. I find it most energetic to have teenagers, business leaders, parents of small children really can contribute in vital ways to the discussion around where the library is going. So it's not just community leaders.
Yep. And I would add to that in identifying your stakeholders, this is the place where you get users and non-users. This is really the place where you broaden where you're going to get your input. And it's amazing how reaching out to people who don't use your library and asking them in, doing a personal ask-in, really engages them.
So I want to talk a little bit about what the retreat looks like, and the first part of the retreat is really setting the stage. You're going to have people in the room who know a lot about your library and people who know very little about your library. So we start with an hour, maybe an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours in some cases, of a presentation. And that is starting with the library director giving a report on a snapshot of the library. What does the library do? Most people don't realize that the library is more than books. So we ask the library director to cover what other services are offered, maybe some meaningful stories, as well as some basic data about the library. Where does the funding come from? How many staff and what the different service areas are. Really a positive snapshot of what the library is currently doing. Then, following that, we will have done an array of data gathering. That might be surveys, that might be community data, that might be interviews. We will do a brief report on what we've heard in the data gathering phase of the process. Then this depends a little bit on whether we've done a survey or how much community input we've gotten prior to the process, and that's one of the things that the planning team helps us decide, is a presentation on the community. What does the community look like? What we might have heard from a community survey. Really an aspect of feeding back to the people in the room what the community really does look like today.
Yep.
So that it's important that the people in the room know about the community as well as the library, and many people in the community may not know the whole aspects of what's happening in the community.
And I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
One of the ways that that this particular presentation can occur is to have somebody from your city, your town, from the Chamber of Commerce give this kind of a presentation, and people always really enjoy it because it's rare that they get the community profile in 15 minutes.
And then a last piece that we usually do is a discussion of future trends in libraries. Most of the people, even if they're knowledgeable about your library, may not know all of the exciting things that are happening in libraries across the country. And we can really bring that to the table and talk about whether it's maker spaces or teen services or outreach or some of the revolutions that are happening behind the scenes in staffing and technology. We do a brief presentation to give people kind of a sense of what the possibilities are for your library. I think that's really important because so many people, particularly non-users, continue to think of libraries equaling books. And I think it's really important to give the people in the community retreat a sense of what the possibilities are.
So one of the things that you want to think about internally and then ask the questions externally is, what's the role the library should play in the community? The traditional role is we give books and DVDs and we answer questions from the reference desk, but I think anybody who's planning for a library now knows that that role has really shifted. My favorite library in St. Paul, if you go into it, you'd really have to pinch yourself to remind yourself that it is a traditional library because it's a small business center, it does homework help, it's got meetings going on all over the library, it provides all kinds of resources to seniors and to small businesses. The role is really different, and it has, the role is shaped by what the community's needs are, which is where this process really is enhanced by asking those questions. And so what you're wanting to do as part of this rapid results planning process is get your feedback from the participants is, what are the community's needs? You've learned this from your survey and from your presentation. And then begin to answer the question, so how should the library address these services? If you have new Americans moving into your community, if you have a military community that really has a large population, if you have growing numbers of teens or seniors, how can the library be addressing the needs of these various groups? Whether it's individual groups or the community at large. And then asking the question, which we do as part of the retreat, so knowing what our community looks like, what the library does now, where should the library focus its resources in the next 3 to 5 years?
Following that kind of visioning session, what really emerges are some focus areas which really shape the library's goals. So, for example, two common ones are that a community need might be for much more robust early literacy services. And so that would be a focus area, and we would poke and prod a little bit and begin to shape what a goal for the library might look like around early literacy services. Another common one is that the library has a host of services that are being underused. And so out of that, a goal might emerge around public awareness or PR and marketing. And so out of that visioning session, typically most of the goals for the strategic plan would be emerging, at least the concepts would be emerging out of that visioning session.
I think one of the things that I'd add here, I would say in probably the last 10 strategic planning processes I've done, what emerges almost always as a focus area is the visibility of the library.
Yeah, absolutely.
Though that there are so many people who don't know what the library does and doesn't know what it has to offer. And so this is a really very clear, distinct message that the library gets when you get these people in the room who say, I didn't have a clue you did that.
Right. So following the definition of these focus areas, we're not really going to do in a retreat exact wording of library goals, but out of those focus areas, we begin smaller group discussions around what strategies should the library employ to really make those goals happen. Those strategies may be working in partnerships, they may be redirecting staff or resources, they may be just a new focus. And so a critical part of that, which often emerges, is how the library can leverage partnerships. And that may be the city, it may be the county, it may be local businesses, oftentimes it's working with your schools. And so that's a critical part of the discussion around strategies. So out of all of that, it's kind of amazing. Usually by the end of the day, 95% of the framework of the strategic plan is done. Sometimes there are one or two issues that are outside of the community retreat, but the retreat really allows you to start with the data, discuss goals, and then get out to the strategy level such that the real framework of the strategic plan is set, and you just need to put it in writing.
The voila piece is the fact that I really believe that the participants who are part of this retreat really do see at the end of the day when they come together for the last session that what has emerged is a really solid framework for the library's strategic plan.
And one of the exciting parts about the retreat, which we don't have a slide for, but I think it builds a synergy among the people in the room and a buy-in into the future of the library that's beyond just goals and strategies. It's someone spends a Saturday talking about the library, and they are committed to the library afterwards. So we often see people who participate in a retreat becoming board members or becoming funders or engaging the library in a new way. And that's kind of an offshoot, an exciting offshoot of the retreat planning process.
Yep. So after we've had the rapid results planning retreat, and again, anywhere from 40 to 80. I think our top number was 82 people. That felt a little bit like organized chaos, but it worked. We the consultants, take all of the input, all of the dozens of flip charts that came out of that day, and sit down and draft the strategic plan. And the strategic plan that we draft is generally fairly concise. Usually a page to 2 page with goals, usually 3 to 4. And strategies, we really make an effort to make the plan be at sort of that 10,000 foot level because we're going to work on implementing it afterwards. We present the draft plan to the planning team for their review and then their input, and then we revise the plan, and eventually it goes to the governing board.
Just to give you a little more details, typically the plan would include a mission and vision. Sometimes that's the same mission and vision. Sometimes that's redone in the planning process, depending on the library's needs. And occasionally we also include a values statement, what the library's values are. And that really depends on the situation with the library, of things like accessibility or community involvement or censorship. Some of those are values that may be important to include or may not be, depending on your local situation. So as Sue said, the plans tend to be quite short. They're at the strategic level, focused on the leadership, your governing body and the library administration. 4 to 5 goals, 3 to 5 strategies for each goal. It's really the driving vision that comes from the community that allows your leadership to really direct the library in the future. And that's not to ignore the library staff, because implementation planning really is a key factor that we'll just talk about in a minute that is really driven by staff.
Okay. So once we've presented the final version to your governing body, we have a wonderful graphic artist, graphic designer who works with us at Library Strategies. He takes the plan, the plain Word document, and turns it into a very graphically appealing final version. That's the version that you're going to You're going to share with your community the Rapid Results Planning Retreat participants so that they can see where their time was invested and how it came out. We recommend that the plan is shared as broadly as possible on your website, feature articles in the newspaper. But this is a way for you to let your community know the direction that the library is going in the next 3 to 5 years. And we also create and use a dashboard. A dashboard is taking those goals and strategies and turning them into an interactive tool that lets you measure progress on the plan. And this is the way that you can use that plan with your board and quarterly report on the progress on the plan, what's happening with all of the strategies and the actions. If it's stuck, where do we have to amend the plan a little bit? But it's a very good tool for making sure that your strategic plan is a living document.
So out of this, the strategic plan is typically a 3 to 5 year plan that stays in place for that 3 to 5 years. Implementation planning is how to make the plan actually work. It gets down to the tactical level, and that's primarily a focus on staff and a work plan for staff. We've heard from the community, we've heard from leadership, we have a new direction for the library. How do we make that work? And so this work plan that we create based on the strategic plan focuses heavily on the first year to 18 months to 2 years, because that's really where you can define the tactics. We recommend that the staff go back and update the implementation plan that we help create, probably annually, maybe every 2 years, and really add things and remove things that have been accomplished. This is a key document that often is 20 or 30 pages as opposed to the short strategic plan, and it's really a management tool that defines tasks, responsibilities, timeframes, and outcome measurements or other kinds of measurements that make sure that you're keeping on track with your strategic plan. Resources can be a key depending on what your implementation plan and strategic plan define. Where do the resources come from? That you have to get the resources before you can actually implement something. So the implementation planning process is one. It's really part of the whole strategic planning process, but really defines that much more detailed level to make the strategic plan come alive and actually happen and get accomplished.
I want to encourage you to listen to this third in the series of the webinars, which is about raising money to support your plan and your library. This next webinar on development planning is something that we would encourage a library director to share the link with their friends or their foundation members, their boards of trustees, because this really broadens the strategic planning process and makes it meaningful to all of the different groups that basically run the library and keep it going into the future. So we'd invite you to learn more about the webinar. Visit our website, librarystrategiesconsulting.org. We have a Facebook page and a Twitter page. We also do a blog that covers just a really broad range of topics, and we archive that on our website. So please feel free to visit any of those and contact us if you have any more questions.
And one final note, our next webinar is actually on development and fundraising planning. And a few years ago, we actually worked with the American Library Association. Library Strategies published a book called Beyond Book Sales. Private fundraising has become so much more important to so many libraries, and based on our own experience and the experience of other libraries, we've learned that book sales, while they can be important, there's so many other more robust ways to raise money for your library. And so this book really defines and helps you get to other kinds of fundraising beyond book sales. So we encourage you to check that out from ALA, and also we'll be talking in the next webinar a little bit about the broader aspect of fundraising and how to create plans to get to some of the topics that are covered in Beyond Book Sales.
So please join us for the next webinar.